Casual job that could be passed around.
How are you?
Yes, I think somebody was just coming in, but I didn't see that. But let's see if we ask you a quick question. So we've obviously got the Zoom link going on, right? And then I think that's it from people who don't get to speak. Because Beth said that she wasn't going to speak. And we got people. Yeah. So we go to him. Goodness, I'm going to start with random stuff. I'm asking for it, and I'm going to go to say something. And I think you're very right. I was really like crazy.
Yeah, like was trouble. Like I thought that. I thought like I never got that.
You're getting me to
I would love you to say something. But do you want to try and
Excited about that, and I thought another and I wasn't still.
well, I think we're just going to bring lots of people in. It's fine.
No, I'm okay.
All right. Shall we get started? How do I know if Anne's on the line? What do we? Anne Kelly, shout if you're there. Maybe she's. Hello, can you see Anne Kelly on the line? No. Okay. Well, she'll be here soon. I think. Well, so we have some people on the line that are going to be potential speakers, and then people that are going to be people watching this as well. Sophie.
Yeah, we've done that.
This is live stream. We're live. So we're going to get started. So thank you everyone for coming. This is going to be a session on responsible policy engagement. So no better topic for being, on the ground here in Glasgow at COP26. And we're going to hear from a couple of organisations that have, taken some kind of action in this area, and they're going to describe what they've been doing. And then really, I think this is going to be one of the more casual meetings you'll go to at COP26. It'll be good to get some kind of discussions going. I'll ask you a few questions. Good to hear from you about, what you are doing, maybe what you aren't doing, and why you're not doing that. Where are the challenges? But I think before we start properly, I think with such a small group, it'd be good to introduce ourselves. So I'll start, because I maybe didn't say it properly, but I'm Emily Hickson. I work for the B team. I'm the head of advocacy there. So the B team is one of the 7 coalition members of the Women Business Coalition. And I'll hand this way.
Okay. I'm Javier Moreno. I'm the CEO of Cemento Polpaico, the cement company, #1 cement company in Chile.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jennifer Murley, Vice President of Sustainability at Mastercard, headquartered in New York.
Everybody, I'm Elizabeth Sturman. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund, and I do net zero and corporate partnerships work. And I don't necessarily focus exclusively on policy, but try and really think about it in the bigger context of corporate leadership. So I'm really intrigued to stay informed with that.
Hello, I'm Alan Luca, Vice President for Sustainability in DS.
Just before you start, I just want to check that people on the line, can you hear this properly? No, not at all. Okay. So
yeah,
maybe
it's a little choppy. And so I think you may need to project.
Really project. Okay. Experiment over here. Project.
I will try to project. Is that better?
Yeah. Or do we have this?
Hello, everyone. I'm Edward Connery. Our focus is a lot on our environmental footprint, but increasingly we are connecting with our policy colleagues based in DC to engage in the policy space.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's check on the microphone. Is that awful feedback? No.
that better? Okay, great. Hi everyone, Owen Griffin, also at Meta, formerly Facebook, and I lead our policy and sustainability, our policy engagement and sustainability in Europe, working a lot with the European Union and developing our program in Europe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Mathoni, or should I take this off? My name is Amber Mathoni, and I am a graduate student, and I am studying agriculture and food systems. I have a background in the food processing industry, and I'm very interested in corporate social responsibility and sustainable supply chains. And so, obviously, the role that policy plays in all of that is very of interest to me as well. Thank you.
And I was previously working with peer strategies on our corporate sustainability team, and so I'm also interested in
Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Chris. I'm the Director of Communications at the Union Business Commission, although only the past 3 weeks. So I'm very much in how great work works.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Ceres and I'm leading communications at the IKEA Foundation. Hello, my name is Sophie Kunze. I'm Managing Director of Policy with the Green Business Coalition. So if you have complaints about the coffee, you can come to me.
I'm Nat Inbush. With International Paper. We're a global pulp and fiber-based packaging company. Just here to listen and learn. Fairly new at this.
I'm Lizzie Meager. I'm Policy Editor of Capital One Ceres from the newspaper. Sorry. I'm Lizzie Meager. I'm Policy Editor of Capital Monitor.
There we go.
Thank you. Well, so we have it here today because we and my colleague Anne Kelly, who will hopefully join the line from Boston soon, is going to explain a little bit about the work that Ceres, the US sustainability business organization, has been doing. I work for B Team, which, if you don't know it, is kind of CEO group, and it's got companies like IKEA, Natura, Unilever involved. And together, we've started to tackle this issue, particularly through the lens of the kind of the difference between what companies are lobbying for, when they turn up at spaces like this, and what their trade associations have been lobbying for. And so we encourage, and we've started with a group of companies, and I think, which one of you said you were from DSM? Is that you? Yeah. So companies like DSM have been doing this too, encouraging companies to do an audit, really having a look at what their internal policy positions are, what they say their climate policy positions are, and what those are of their trade associations. Now, for a company like Unilever, this is incredibly complicated. They have about 600 trade associations, I think, around their global business. But nevertheless, they kind of undertook this. They said that they were going to kind of scrutinize those trade association policies against 1.5, and they undertook a kind of survey of those companies. And that then triggered lots of results and conversations, which then their kind of market government affairs leads are able to then talk about with their trade association leads, whoever held those relationships. And then we really were encouraging those businesses to go one step further, so not to just know where that misalignment was occurring or where it wasn't, but to then, to use the position inside the trade association to, try and move it, frankly, try and work with peers within that trade association and try and have those conversations through the different working groups to move the position of the trade association. But we also encourage them to set a deadline for when those conversations were going to occur, and when they were going to, and with this kind of, I guess, this stick being kind of held over that they would indeed leave if they didn't change their position. So this is this is one way of looking at how you would deal with misalignment between companies and trade associations. We've seen lots of companies start to do these audits. So the oil and gas companies have been doing them for sure, BP and Shell, DSM, Unilever, but we'd like to encourage more companies to do this. So we've published a toolkit, which you can find on the B team website, which kind of goes through the steps of how you would do that engagement and has all sorts of like templates of emails that you could send to your trade associations to kind of bring up this issue of misalignment. But I know the work that Ceres has been doing is actually one level more sophisticated. So I'm looking forward for Anne to join the call to hear about that. So we're just going to share some examples up top. So I'm going to go to Helen, if that's okay to you, Helen, to talk a little bit about the work that Share Action's been doing. And then hopefully we'll hear from Anne, and then we'll get into a bit of a discussion about what this looks like in your companies. Over to you, Helen. Hopefully we'll be able to hear you.
No, thanks, Emily. And I'm sorry, but the audio is really quite patchy. So hopefully you can hear me a bit more easily. But thank you, first of all, to Women in Business for the invitation to this panel. For those of you who aren't familiar with Share Action, we're a charity NGO based in London with an office in Brussels. We've been going for about 15 years. We have policy teams that are based in London and in Europe, so we work very closely on largely government policy at EU institutional level and also within government. I'm going to take this on a slightly different tangent because I sort of feel that I'm here to represent the voice of the investors that we work very closely with. And one thing I think from a policy perspective, which is important to recognise with investors, is that investors themselves are often publicly listed entities, and really should be held accountable too for practicing what they preach. And I know that we're all quite sick of hearing about greenwashing, and there are certainly some really great examples of good practice within the industry, as much as there are things that we'd like to see more of happening. I think one thing, we published a report earlier in the year called Leading Practice, and I think it's important to underline that we don't quite yet have best practice. I think in some respects, everybody's finding their way, and it's been quite a journey for the investor community, I think, particularly over the last 3 years. But leading practice really sought to really emphasize the importance of embedding accountability with investee companies. But I think this also goes for investors as well. And it's quite important in terms of internal policy that accountability is embedded at senior management level and trickles right down throughout the company. And I certainly think that among corporates, it's where we see great leadership from the top that's trickled right the way through to the bottom, which is where we're seeing the best advances in terms of ESG and sustainability in general. I think the other thing that I would say from a policy perspective is that transparency remains paramount in terms of importance and certainly things that we look for. And from an investor perspective, we certainly like to see some transparency in terms of voting policies, escalation strategies, and similarly from corporates, just transparency as well around where are your policy obstacles for change, what is blocking you from moving further and faster. And I often find that it's the tricky conversations that can be the most interesting, because this is where investors can start to get involved and help corporates unblock those very difficult, sometimes very difficult obstacles for progress. I hope that's okay for an introductory comment, Emily. Shall I pass on?
You can indeed. And I realised actually we didn't get a chance to let Alison, for you to introduce yourself on the line over there. Do you just want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Allison Rose with Autodesk. I run government affairs around sustainability for the company and look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Well, we can see and hear you probably better than you can see and hear us. So I think with the absence of Anne, I'm going to kick it off. Unless you want to, I'll bring you in a bit later into the discussion. So yeah, and Jenny, right? No. Jenny?
Answer to all of
Okay. Well, I'll try them all. So I was wondering if I could go to you first, Mastercard, just to tell us a little bit. You can choose what you tell us, but about the different approaches that you're taking towards responsible policy engagement, or any challenges that you found in this area. And then I'll be asking all of you the same questions. So get your.
So I'm the guinea pig. I get to go first.
Yeah.
This is what not to say.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So I would say, so at Mastercard, we are a technology company, a financial services technology company, but we're not a financial services company. We don't lend money. We are not a financially, we're not a regulated financial institution. We're the financial transactions. Primarily, our policy engagement as a result of that. Very focused on the material services of our business. So, of course, our ESG goes right. Particularly on the environment and climate, we are finding ourselves in a position where we're just starting to grow and do and we're being approached by partners and investors that is never legislation, which at this point, for those of our clients to really participate in this discussion, you have to really and more than anything, it's about being credible leaders in the sustainability space before taking policy positions or trying to play a very active role in those spaces. So we are a young sustainability team. Our sustainability strategy is fairly young because we are a technology company and a payment network globally. Our footprint is relatively small. Right? We're not a manufacturer of goods. So our footprint is really associated with our data centers, our built environment. So at the same time, we realize if we do our own thing and operate within our own box, say how we're going to finish here, get some renewable energy there, that's great, that's the right thing to do. But we may
mobile phones with individuals.
Oh, okay.
And they turn the camera off. So we didn't lose them, but they just turned the camera off. Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So long story short, we are starting to find our way in terms of policy engagement as it relates to environment and climate, but we're very new to the space.
You feeling that you kind of want to walk the talk before you.
Right, and we are walking the talk in terms of our, we're members of RE100, we're members of the race to, right, we have a science, we were the first in the payments industry to have a science-based target. We just moved up our net zero target from 2050 to 2040. So we feel like, yes, we're walking the talk, but at the same time, we need to get better educated on the implications between, if we were to take policy stances from a climate legislation standpoint, what are the potential impacts that might have for what is effectively not 100% core to our business?
Yeah. I can ask you another question. It's okay, I know the answer, but how much from the sustainability point of view, do you get access into to government affairs and what what they're lobbying on, and also indeed your
meaning our own government,
your own government affairs, and also your major trade associations, is it easy for you to be able to understand what are the top issues that they're
It
looking
is.
on
It is.
behalf of Mastercard?
It is because it's clear and it's been a policy stance or policy stances that we've been active on for many years. And they are also a relatively small team. And we are in different places in the organization, but well linked from a leadership connection standpoint. So there's active dialogue. In fact, they're coming to us as a sustainability team to say, how does our policy team get more engaged with your team and vice versa? So that conversation is starting to flourish.
And I'd love to hear from others, because this is definitely a complaint I've heard from other businesses where that connection is not well made. That there's pretty government affairs sitting over here and sustainable business over here, and the two, don't link very much. So something they experience. Could I ask the Ascend the same question, kind of what approaches you've taken to responsible policy engagement and what challenges you see in this domain?
Well, as a company which has a pretty diverse product portfolio, so we are very strong in nutrition, health, and bioscience, but we also still have a material business. We are actually in animal feed. At the same time, we are in plant-based proteins. Of course, we are active in very many different platforms, and the reasons to be engaged in this platform is, of course, not only sustainability, but there are also other reasons for being active with certain associations. As you mentioned, we did an assessment to understand what are actually the positions on certain topics which matter for us, to understand where do we fit actually in, and there's full alignment, and also to understand where are maybe challenging positions. That has not led to a conclusion now away from certain associations. But on the other side, I give an example. As a chemical company, we are also heavily engaged as a European chemical company in CEPEC, which is sometimes a tension field. On the other side, we are also, through our co-CEO, Dimitri Dupreze, leading the sustainability forum in CEPEC. And that is actually a fantastic opportunity to bring our beliefs on being compliant with the Paris Agreement, threading really on greenhouse gas reductions fast in line with the Science-Based Target Initiative, to bring actually these aspects forward and influence with this actually the chemical industry. But I think the key is that you, as you mentioned, that you need to have an assessment where you understand where are the associations where potentially hot topics can appear, and then you need at least a strategy how to deal with this. And of course, if certain conflicts are too high, you also need to consider to walk away. I don't think we went into the process where they gave it a color code. I think that would be also different, because there are so heterogeneous reasons why you are in a certain organization that you cannot put it together and say, and I think you need to understand where are the different points, and then you need to understand what is your position. Do you want to take an influential role, or do you say my role is so minor that actually the affiliation rather does harm to us as an organization, and that we as an organization maybe can do in regards to advocacy and policy influence in this trade organization, have a positive impact. And that is the outcome of the output. So it's not a color code where we say we walk away or not, but it's an understanding and then having an I would say educated choice also within the organization how to deal with this. Because as a matter of fact, also within the companies, have different interests and different levels of awareness. So sustainability team is one voice within the company. educating business colleagues on the learnings is, I think, an equally important aspect and an equally important outcome of this process.
I would like to ask our method corner over here. So how do you ensure that you're using that
Close to me. Oh, like here. Okay. Okay. I'll try to keep my electronic. And I'm sorry, we came in a little bit late. Just a point of order. Is this like a Chatham House discussion, or I just wanted to make sure I understood the kind of. Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure we got here late, so I just wanted to make sure I understood. Yeah. So for Meta, we have committed to a net zero target and a science-based approach to that, and to maintain 100% renewable energy for our portfolio. So a lot of our engagement in this space has been mapped so far to furthering a lot of those corporate goals. We came out in support of the Build Back Better plan and the climate provisions there to further the US's decarbonization strategies, and also support the European Green Deal. And we believe that we can continue to engage operationally on our goals, but also extending the conversation externally with folks, so that we can ensure that policies are in place to help us and hopefully the world reach those goals, both on the renewable energy side and to decarbonize. Yeah, yes, all the above. So for example, we're a founding member of REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, and now that bigger corporates have made a lot of progress in procuring renewable energy, the focus has been shifting to help go deeper into the corporate base to power their operations with renewable energy. And also aligning with other corporations in signing on to letters and things when we feel like it's consistent with the policies that we want to see further to decarbonize. For us, we're still learning how to best engage, and I think we're seeing more and more opportunities to partner both with other corporates, but also with coalitions and NGOs in this space who are gathering voices together.
Yeah, I think we always start at the highest level. So of course, we've got a renewable goal like we do, but which we've kind of achieved, of course, at a global level where we're in support of. Oh, really? I thought I had a loud voice, but maybe not. Where was I? Yeah, so of course, our global position is just like in support of policies to decarbonize from a practical point of view. So we have lots of policy alignment calls between the US team, US policy, EU policy, and EU sustainability, looking at things like directly side by side, like what are the energy climate provisions, what the Fit for 55 package say, and are we ever at risk of kind of saying the wrong thing? But of course, globally, they are broadly heading in the same direction. So I think we're comfortable sort of having nuanced local positions which support what we're trying to do in those regions. But actually, although, yeah, of course, there's at a country level, there can be very different approaches. I don't think it's kind of inconsistent for us to say this is what we're doing here because this is right for this region. This is what we're doing in the US. So it does require a lot of management and a lot of side-by-side kind of looking at those policy directions. Luckily in Europe, they're kind of a little bit further ahead on a couple of issues. So you're able to sort of say, hey, this is the direction that the Renewable Energy Directive is going to go down, or this is what's happening on the Energy Efficiency Directive, and sort of help your teams see what's coming maybe possibly ahead.
Yeah, what I've had from today, I know you're IKEA Foundation. It's really
Maybe just leave it there.
I think I could have before. The last thing is having the capacity in it to do that level of things side by side. But what is the what should be our position on this? Yeah, whether it's actually energy power and you like to come in? That round to you. Put it on the page. Yes, so this is Elizabeth Strickland with Environmental Defense Fund, and I've been doing this work with companies my whole career, which has been a few years now, 25 years, and I've seen leadership from companies in a number of ways on sustainability, and policy is kind of way back at the back, right? And even companies who are really stepping up, they're putting out the statements, and they are saying that very publicly, and sometimes at the C-suite level, which I think is really critical. And then I think about, okay, well, we need to get everybody there, not everybody, we need to get more companies there. And also, it's almost like at the same time, we need in parallel to step it up to a whole different level, which is, okay, you've got this statement, you follow through with your trade association, because you've got to have alignment there. And then you actually do the advocacy, right? You actually push for the policies, you do the meetings, you do the hard work to get them done. And then even more so, like for a Facebook, Meta, put you guys on the spot, or for any company, right? You think about what's your unique value add where you could make a difference in this space. And so it's almost like, I realize like it's an impossible ask for companies. They're always like, yeah, that's good, but it's not good enough, it is true. It feels like on this issue, we have got to get it going. As someone who spent their whole life on voluntary corporate work, which I'm very proud of my years of work in doing this, I also kind of realized that it's just not enough, right? We've got to have the policy piece, because you can have these companies leading and showing the way, and it's really important and really, really good. And yet without policy to raise the floor, we will not get there. So it's just, I realize it's a hard ask, but I just was hoping to spark some conversation about, for the leaders, like what does that next step look like, and how you're wrestling with through the trade associations, the actual implementation in your product. Just curious of some conversation around that. You're getting at what is that unique influence that you have? Yeah. Yeah. Use that very effectively over the decades. And also, I guess maybe while I have the floor, I'll say one other thing, which is I realize like it's a really hard ask, like with the Build Back Better Act of the United States, because it's basically the company is going to want to say, yeah, increase my taxes, right? I mean, it's really counterintuitive, right? Like, let's be real. This is really hard. So, yeah, we know we
and infrastructure. We've got to pay to transform our economy to be reducing emissions by 50% in 10 years. So, I mean, the incentives are definitely not aligned on it. So, this is really hard to say. So, it's really interesting and curious to hear I think it's hard because there's my sense is from the outside of it, it's like probably Victoria Mills and what he means our work on policy is that just incentives are not really directly aligned. You know, financially it's hard to make this case. A lot of times it's these bills are huge and the pieces that companies don't like. So that part is hard. I think it's hard because there's these maybe remnants of organizational structures internally where they're siloed, right? Where they're not connecting. I mean, the fact that your policy people are reaching out to you is
What's up? Good for them.
I mean, I feel like that's not really happening. Like they're just like, oh, but it's just so, yeah, you know, on that side, it's different, right? So, yeah.
I think this point that you just brought up about tax, lobbying on tax is quite interesting too, because we spent a lot of time in the last couple of years pushing for better government practices and regulations that invest in infrastructure, invest in the net zero economy, and then we also need to have companies that are willing perhaps to pay for it and to continue to pay for it in the next few years. So yeah, I'd love to hear thoughts on that.
I just really have a question. Is there a difference as well in different geographic regions? So I understand in the States that this is a real dialogue, but with the directives coming through the EU for the EU-based companies, is it the same dialogue? And I'm looking at my colleague from DSM. I
cannot say
on tax or
well on tax.
I think my challenge is the same like your challenge from the other side, but it is certainly a dialogue. But I think it's also shifting in Europe, and you see, for example, in Europe at the moment, the European Parliament brings a couple of new regulations out, be it safe and sustainable by design, which is very relevant for our industry. Green Deal played an aspect. And basically they reach also out to trade organizations like CEFIC. Now we can of course say, okay, we stay out of this, and then others speak with the government, or we play a part in the trade organization where we play then of course in our role also bit in maybe a role of putting a bit the mirror out that if we are as CEFIC too defensive, we might actually not be heard and not be seen as a credible partner. And I mean, you have then, of course, the whole range of companies there. You have some companies where indeed there's so much feeling they're losing out in this change because they really don't know where to go with their business to have a winning proposition. And you have others who say, well, I might not like the adjustment too much, but I'm actually capable to adjust. So you have some, they're very difficult to deal with, but you find also within these organizations, of course, allies. And I think that is also a bit how we try to play it. And I think it's probably in the US the same. You try to find within this organization your allies. You try also to find within your own company the allies. And then you find a critical mass of influence where you can then also bring your sustainability values into the discussion and make progress with this. Yeah, I must say I was really looking forward to this conversation because I'm now 1.5 years in this role. I'm in sustainability. I come up from operations, and I always struggle with the fact that we spend a lot of time talking with like-minded people. but I actually believe we make real change by also talking a lot with non-like-minded. And I think the whole space of creating policies, influencing policies, is a fantastic opportunity to reach out exactly to people we can influence, but who are maybe not there where we think we or they should be.
Yeah, sure. I'm very envious of all what you're saying, because unfortunately in Chile we don't have any dialogue at this moment with the authorities. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chilean history, but we had a huge economic development the last year. In 2019, we got this social commission, and so every person who's a technician in the government is a person who knows here, and so we don't have a technical with whom to talk, right? So at the end of the day, what we spend most of our efforts is trying to influence leaders from the social area, so that they can, promote voters, and then politicians will follow. But we don't have a dialogue with the government. I don't know if we are taking this, and somebody is watching that in Chile, but that is true. Of the government is not watching, but that's what happened to us. So I think we used to have that dialogue 3 years ago, and we lost it. And I think we lost it. And now, to be honest, I think we lost it because the companies are not pushing policies aiming at the improvement of the whole society, but aiming at the improvement of their own side. And I think that at the end of the day, although it gave us a huge development, growing at 7% for 20 years, it backfired in a way that now it's kind of out of control. So we're in big problems at that way. Really interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'll take that this end. Oh, an answer. Okay. Yeah, really interesting example. Of course, what's this one? In the case of Chile, 2 years ago, weren't we? And then there was a protest, right? Yeah. Riots and a protest, and after that, we are now fighting a new constitution. The delegates that were selected by the people are not politicians at all. They are, people who speak loud, who, I don't know, press in a way that they call the attention, but there's no any technical background there. So we are all pretty much concerned. Hello, Anne. Hello, Anne from Boston. We can see you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Good. Glad to be with you all.
We might have a delay. I was going to say you're someone that needs no introduction, but I'll introduce you anyway. I'm Kelly from Ceres, and I was going to bring you in earlier, but perhaps I'll bring you in a minute. Can you hear me okay?
Not really.
Can you hear me okay now?
That was better. I'm hearing from some of our other participants that it's pretty choppy, but you keep talking now. I think it just got better.
Excellent. Well, we've been having a fascinating discussion thus far. We've been talking about kind of this alignment with trade associations. We've been talking about figuring out, what your global policies mean for your national level work. We've been talking about how you work with, your peers to be able to make changes, but also sometimes this is an opportunity to talk with your industry peers who don't agree with you and try and move things forward that way. Business has an opportunity there. So I'd love to bring you in, Anne, if that's okay, just to talk a little bit about the role of Ceres working on responsible policy engagement. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the work you were doing last year and your report, and then we'll carry on. We're kind of chopping it, like we're picking up topics as we go and rolling with the punches in this round table. Hope that's okay with everyone. But
Sure.
Anne, over to you.
Okay, and just confirm that my voice is coming through okay? You can hear me? Okay, good. I'm so glad, because I was getting a lot on the other end, and really nice to see all of you, and so appreciate everything We Mean Business did for this pavilion and to make this conversation possible. I hope you're having no logistical difficulties and that Glasgow is great fun. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you. This is the most important conversation right now. There's nothing more important that leading companies can do in this particular moment than to push for effective climate policy, and to do so in a way that is consistent and forthright and public and assertive, and that either brings their trade associations along or deliberately sets themselves apart from any trade association that is acting in opposition or feeding the lowest common denominator or pushing on the entrenched companies of the past. From Ceres' perspective, while we've been pushing this notion for 10 years, I have never seen such a ratcheting up and such a, I don't want to say alarmist, but such an assertive message coming from our investors. And as I think most of you know, Ceres is a nonprofit. We've been around since 1989. We were established by investors who wanted to be more active in the companies they own. And they joined with environmentalists to come together after the Exxon Valdez spill to try to incorporate standards to that effect. We now have an investor network with over $23 trillion of assets under management, and it spans the full range of asset managers and investors. And we have a company network, 77 major Fortune 500s that are on the policy network, another 65 that are part of our company network. And we're really trying to get this right. So when investors call out an issue in particular and want to be educated on it and want to be able to press their companies, our job is to make sure the investor bench, the investors are educated so that they know what and how to say to companies and what will make a difference. But they're coming in up in particular and seeing the kind of duplicity and hypocrisy from certain companies, no one around this table, obviously. And that's causing real reputational concern and an actual investment risk. So what was the report about? Well, the report we wrote initially last July was a blueprint to give companies guidance on how to get this right. And hats off to you, Emily, and the B team for putting together such a straightforward, sensible toolkit on how to do this work. I really like what the B team put together because it was, easy, straightforward, very direct and practical. We put together something that was a little more extensive, that gave a little more background on companies needing to be transparent. Investors want candor. Ceres is all about candor. On how to separate yourself from a trade association that may not be acting in accordance with your leadership, making sure that your lobbying and political leadership matches your operational ambition. So operational ambition, political ambition need to go hand in hand. There is no doubt now about what's happened with the kind of resistance that we have seen. I just want to call on my colleague, Allison, who has her hand up right now, because I'm wondering if she's having difficulty hearing. Go ahead, Allison.
I can hear you just fine, Anne. I'd love to jump off of some of what you're saying once you're finished.
No time like the present, Allison. Autodesk is a really valuable leading member of the BICEP Coalition, and why don't you take it right now?
Yeah, from what I could pick up for all of you in the room, it was a really interesting discussion about trade associations. And I might take another tack now that we have Ceres, for which we are a member, to say, I think there's two pieces of this for corporations. One, obviously, you have to know your current trade associations and where they are on climate. But that is insufficient if you don't know, if you aren't part of the right groups to push positive climate policy and to enact real change. And I think that's where Ceres and perhaps the B team, certainly We Mean Business, can play a really critical role, that it's not just about defense, so to speak, to make sure folks like, the Chamber of Commerce always comes up, are not, hurting. It's, are you part of the right groups to also help? Because frankly, and this is still true, and we are a member of a lot of these groups, as a government affairs professional, you see these letters that other corporations are doing, and you're like, oh, we agree with that, but it never comes across your desk, and you never know how exactly you can best push, right? So for example, I work a lot on sustainability. It's certainly not the only policy issue that I'm focused on. I'm pulled in different directions. Autodesk is a technology company. We're in construction, we're in manufacturing. There's a whole host of policy issues. And of course, climate is underpinning all of those. But it's really helpful to have someone say, hey, pay attention over here. Your voice and your commitment could really have an impact. And so if companies aren't members of groups like Ceres or, you know, really climate focused organizations, there's some great ones in Europe that we're a part of. I think that that has to be part of that trade association audit.
Well, thanks so much, Allison. Could not have said that better. There's a proactive quality here that Allison is underscoring beautifully. And there's so many ways now to be proactive, joining the right group, getting shoulder to shoulder with the right peers, hanging with the leaders. There's so many opportunities, both real and actual and virtual and through social media. So there's a number of on-ramps to this conversation. And I guess I would just say that our report attempts to push you onto those positive policy engagement on-ramps, be with the right groups, hang with the right organizations, and there's plenty of them. Of course, there's more in Europe than in the US. Hats off to the EU and the UK. And there are organizations all over the world now that can get you on the right path, including We Mean Business, of course. So it's not as if you are left empty-handed or having to go it alone. That is the last thing we want. We want to surround companies with the support they need to get this right. And then we want to make sure, here's the limb I'm going to go out on. I'm talking to the investors to say, hey, you got to reward the companies that get this right. You got to figure it out. You got to specifically reward the companies that are acting in a way that is responsible on the policy front. Put that on Ceres. Believe me, we're talking to Larry Fink. We're talking to Vanguard and State Street, in addition to the small investors, to make sure that we get this right. The final thing I'll say is that we are doing another benchmarking report for next year. Last year, we did a benchmark on the Fortune 100. We're going to do that same group again and score them both on direct lobbying. How are they talking to lawmakers directly in their own right? And indirect lobbying, which means, are they working with a trade association or are they hiding behind a trade association that is misrepresenting them? And we're likely actually to add political spending to this year's report. Won't bore you with those details, but we are seeing from a number of funders and from a number of investors that there's real interest in this work and in taking it further. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the last 2 months have certainly pointed to the need for this, given what we just experienced with the Build Back Better package in the US and the complicated opposition around it. I won't go into any more detail in that, but certainly raising the question of the depth of commitment when a company is being called upon, in this case, to pay higher taxes, certainly raised a number of valid questions that we're examining. Not a simple issue, but I want to leave it with that, Emily, because I think what you and I and all of us are far more interested in are the comments like Allison's and what the companies have to say and answering their questions. But thank you for the time.
Thank you, Anne. And yeah, I mean, the issue about the Build Back Better package and the need, advocating for what we need in terms of climate policy, better infrastructure, etc., but then the money to pay for it as well. That issue's already come up. I'd like to pick up what you were saying about, investors are pushing for this, funders are pushing for this. We have a couple of NGOs, foundations in the room. People are putting pressure on companies to get this right. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about why this is important to you, and why you see this as a hot topic. So you've got pressure coming from this direction. And Helen, of course, already talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. As I said earlier, I have a background before joining the IQ Foundation for CDP. So I with this area, and it's great to see how this discussion has moved. And I think it probably even moved on more than we think. I like to refer to a book recently published by Paul Polman about the expectations of companies to play a net positive role. I think that is spot on. I think business is no longer there to, clean up the harm it has created, or, tick maybe certain boxes, but it is about what role do you play to improve livelihood for people on a healthy planet. And that is changing the whole, I think, environment for businesses and the way businesses should look at working with policymakers. And what we are trying to do as IKEA Foundation increasingly, in particular, we started on the climate front, is identifying the areas where we can support businesses, encourage businesses to do exactly that. And that could be around bringing these businesses together under a platform like We Mean Business. Indeed, that was a big bet across many years ago already. But it's also about enabling the development of standards. We are, for example, supporting the World Benchmarking Alliance, both at the business but also finance sector. And this is about creating the opportunities for business to collaborate, but not only between among the peers in their business sector, but also cross-sectoral. Because if we look at where some of the big solutions need to come, it is about working across different sectors, different types of organizations. And so our grant making has been focusing on these kind of priorities. I think what we are now looking as IKEA Foundation, as an organization ourselves, is do we need to step up more to directly engage with the policymakers? A long time ago, we did this, or until now, we did this actually through our partners. But we now start to collect so much evidence and examples, good examples, positive examples. Should we start becoming more active in sharing those with policymakers and to enable policymakers to overcome that mental, I think, hesitation that to move to a world where we can marry climate and a better livelihood is actually possible. And that is, I think, where we are as an organization. And we now need to start finding our way and figuring out how we're going to do that.
And you're going to have to shout at us if you can't hear at any point. Just always raise your hand if you can't hear anything. I just want to pick up on the point you made right at the beginning about the Paul Pullman's thesis around net positive advocacy, which I don't think is actually all that fundamental, but I like the way you put it in the book around that we need to move from this kind of transactional relationship between business and government, you know, the lobbyists in Washington or down in Westminster kind of asking for stuff and putting stuff out in return, that transactional relationship, to this more, as you say, this kind of multi-stakeholder way of doing policy, where business sits at the same table as civil society, sits at the same table as government, and starts to wrestle with, what is the enabling policy that is needed, and what is business going to contribute, which is a bit like the Women Business Ambition Loop theory of change, really, like in reality. And I think you've seen examples, I think, in Sweden, of where they've really started to look at kind of industrial roadmaps, sector by sector, but each one done by government, business, and unions. And I think Denmark has been similar as well. So I think we are seeing that at this COP. I think we're seeing that business has really, come to the table. We've seen several initiatives between business, government, and other stakeholders. But hopefully the relationship of advocacy, policy, like responsible policy engagement that we're talking about going forward, allows that more holistic approach, that kind of dialogue versus that kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of, which I think you've moved out of. That was maybe the 80s, but there's still a little bit of that on the cards. I'd love to go to our paper friends. So you're in social paper. to get your thoughts on this opening question. What do you think about approaches to responsible policy engagement? And then I think next time we're going to go, keeping Meta straight to that branching. And then we'll be wrapping up, I think, about quarter two changes.
Yeah, I think so. With International Paper, like I said, we're both, we're a manufacturer based in the U.S. Most of our operations are in the southeastern U.S., and that's where the vast majority of the sustainably managed forests that we source our fiber from are located. So just to provide a little bit of context, and so we're both a manufacturer, we're a thermal energy user in our manufacturing, and we play a really important role in the supply chain for sustainably sourced wood fiber and recovered fiber. So I think and I'm not from our government relations team, I'm on the sustainability team, but we are working increasingly closely with that group, I think over the last few years in particular. And that's because the bar is being raised across the board, right? I think in terms of our own goals that we're setting, in terms of the signals from the planet and society, as the bar continues to be raised on climate and these other areas, we recognize the policy has to underpin our more ambitious targets to keep up sort of with the pace. So we do work really closely with our government relations group. We have a number of internal working teams where we have those folks on them, and we're in kind of constant dialogue, which I think is really, really productive and is probably different from where we were even 5 or even 2 or 3 years ago, to be honest. But I guess maybe the nuanced point I would add to this is just that as the bar continues to be raised, the issues get trickier and trickier. I mean, there's the big picture stuff, right? Talking about taxes, you're talking about alignment towards a sustainable economy and net zero. And not to say that those are, we shouldn't think about those, but I think within kind of the how do you get there, it gets really nuanced. And so we think about, as a manufacturer, what does it look like to incentivize and develop technologies that will get us that sort of last mile to something moving towards, net zero emissions from a thermal energy producer, which is a really difficult thing, and the technology isn't there yet today to do that. So how do you think about that on the supply chain side? And actually, I'll put in a plug for the Forest Solutions Group of WBCSD, of which we're members, putting out a net zero roadmap for the forest sector later in the week, and it talks a lot about some of these themes. But when we think about in the forestry supply chain, how do we make sure that we're advocating for policies that recognize the importance of working forests, and not conservation is super important, and globally we recognize that, especially in tropical regions. But we source in the U.S. Southeast, which are working forests, are highly sustainable. They capture carbon at the same or better rate than reserve forests. So how do we make sure that that's being, those nuances are part of the policy and the dialogue? And on the product side, what does it look like within things like EPR, which is really tricky legislation, but separating different product types, some of which we believe are more sustainable than others and have a much bigger role in the circular bioeconomy because they come from sustainable sources and they're highly recycled. So how do we carve out sort of our specific niche within those big concepts? I think again, it just gets more and more nuanced as we hopefully get closer to the types of solutions that will take us where we need to go.
And just on that point of but I mean, this is where I think the rubber hits the road in terms of where organizations like ours, especially the B team, are very high level of what we help our companies advocate on, right? The 1.5, like here, like we're renewable energy policy maybe. And of course, companies like Ceres go a little bit level deeper within business, with its systems, but we are not able to really help, articulate exactly what the 1.5 the line policy would be on timber index. Like that level of nuance is, I'm not sure where you get that from an organization that's just formed around climate like ours. Like that's where you go into trade associations to advise you on that type of policy, and that's where it tends to then maybe be common, like lowest common denominator in terms of what that is. So I think where we've identified that there is a bit of a gap is trying to translate and help companies be able to advocate at that level responsibly, where our organizations are just not built with the level of capacity and expertise to be able to advise across all of those sectors. But Sophie, I think I'd love to pass over to you because you've been as our
I have a vision.
She has a vision, exactly. But you tell me.
When I joined in business, and the reason why I was joining, because I see a highly organized lobbying for the wrong things in the past, because they've been trained for decades, right? And I won't name specific industries, but I think we know the examples out there. And what I see is a very willing group of companies. Some have more experience. For example, IKEA has already in 26 countries local people on the ground tracking policy, trying to support it. But the majority of companies are willing but not able. So it feels a bit unorganized, well-intended. And the vision we have is, can we organize positive climate policy advocacy? And that has three elements to it. First, it has that we go from campaign-based policy advocacy to evidence-based policy advocacy. And to give you an example, if you see in Japan, a lot of companies who are investing in renewable energy, and we also see legislation that supports renewable energy, if we can make the link and make that link documented and support backed by both policymakers and companies saying, yeah, this really works, then we have the evidence. If we then take that example to Indonesia, we can encourage the Indonesian government to say, if you do this, 99% is going to work, because we've seen the example elsewhere. Instead of an emotional and if you like almost ethical or 1.5 a line, it becomes one is working. And many governments are looking for that evidence-based support. Now, when you do that, you can do that at the global level. So we could take transport or finance or topic, right? But we can use the political processes of G7, G20, and COP every year to look at what are the hot topics on the negotiating table. Can we build these ambition loops for business policy for different countries to inform the governments that go there so they can say these policies work and those don't. So we get there. And then we take it down to the countries, individual G20 countries. And in Brazil, you might have very different focus than Australia. Australia is a coal exporter. For Brazil, we're talking about protecting the Amazon, right? So we have different topics. And build then a network around it. So instead of coming up with another new coalition and alliance, we build on what's already there. Japan, JCLP, fantastic networks, 200 companies already joined it. Australia, Business Council for Australia have really made a turnaround and are so really proactively working on climate now. So by building on those networks that exist, I think we can very quickly scale policy advocacy. We just need to organize it. Now, using that, we want to then go to the global stocktake in 2 years' time, 2023, where instead of, because they're going to take a stocktake where we at, collectively. And our worry is that it's going to be a lot of research money spent on basically confirming we're still in deep trouble. And what we'd like to do is work back. The recommendations that need to come out there, can we come up with a cohesive set of policy recommendations built on business already taking action across transport, built environment, you see it on the wall here, right? Nature, etc. That can be tailor-made for different sectors, different countries, but are all made in the same way. And then a company like DSM or Mastercard or IPP or another can basically take that approach, apply it to their specific areas of expertise, give us an example of policies that worked, and we will amplify it. That's the vision. And we have the guidance from our partner Ceres B team who have worked it out. So I think we know what's needed. We need to get organized, and that's what I'm hoping that at least I hope that with Women Business Coalition we can get that organizing happening. Just like we build a business pavilion with 50 partners, you guys make the content of the sessions. I don't, but because we have a pavilion, we were able to have a session like this. It's the same idea. So.
Well, we've got the vision, we're just going to implement it. Absolutely. And if you can make this pavilion work in the last 8 weeks that you've built this, Sophie's blood, sweat and tears.
Yeah. Just a mic, not a mic.
Great. I think I'm going to move to wrap it up. Unless people want to throw out any last comments onto the table. Anything burning in your mind?
Or maybe a reaction. If you can do a quick round of who has a reaction to give.
If I could go first, I would say one of the things that I don't know if we struggle with at Mastercard, but one of the gaps I think we have is internal expertise from a science standpoint, right? We rely on our partners like on our coalition work for our 100 million tree goal, but that's a point in time, right? And it's an initiative that is reflective of our commitment to nature-based solutions and natural climate solutions, and it's intended to be, that very much that coalition of when we each work alone, we're not going to get as much done as if we each act together, right? But what we don't have, which many organizations are now starting to realize, that in order to have a clear understanding of how your organization can participate at a policy engagement level that's meaningful, you need people who really know what they're talking about, right? You don't have foresters on staff. I'm sure the international people do, right? Mastercard does not. Our scientists are data scientists and cybersecurity scientists. So a coalition like what you're describing, I think, for an organization like us who is committed to change, just committed to driving change both internally and externally, and helping to amplify efforts and using our global crisis brand to help do that. Help having a coalition like this as a resource to help us just get smarter on where we can play a role and what kind of advocacy we want to provide. I think would be extremely important.
And how to use some of those recurring moments and understand to what extent and in which areas can we be the tipping points and how to start focusing business attention on those. I think that's a tremendous step forward, and I'm so pleased to hear that. And I think it's also there is even much more that can be done in terms of bundling. I think the efforts of business, because you're very right. When you get one thing is to set where you want to go, but once you go into the level of implementation, I've seen that in Unilever as well at the time. Responsible palm oil sourcing or tea, it gets incredibly complicated, and you need to make sometimes trade-offs, or at least you need to say we need to move first in that area, and we have to look at what and tackle the side effects in a way that is consistent with our vision. But here, I think much more can be done to bundle the resources and the efforts of, I always call it the coalition of the willing. You need to make those who really want to make progress, and maybe de-invite, or at least at that moment in time, those who wish to put the foot on the brake, because let's face it, those companies also exist. So I think the direction is really encouraging, but I think that we can do much more to ensure that we bring those collective knowledge resources together to make that those leaps towards responsible policy making.
I just want to add that, because I forgot to mention CDP, because I put this whole idea of the European democracy, and I want to share this is like a real coalition effort. Our entire boards of all the 7 partners are fully squared behind it. And can you imagine when you now have a CDP where information gets shared with investors? Imagine if we use exactly the same information, exactly the same accountability reporting, and we use it to help policymakers. So it's just, we just need to get organized. It's something we can build on so many resources we already have. Yeah, and we're benefiting from a lot of the ambition work that's already been done. We need to replicate to advocacy. So I can't hide my excitement.
So good, and anything about, you're always flexible about the work. When she's got an idea, it's hard to get it sort of like, it's great, it's great. So I think I'm just going to wrap this up, and then we have a photo. I want to say, when we started this conversation, I opened up about the defensive work that I still think is important. This that we do need, as and I took it that we're mostly progressive climate activists in the room who need to address this kind of associations who are looking in the wrong way. And I think there are lots of ways that we discuss how to do that. But we also, I think the points well made from the Autodesk Pavilion, that there's a real need, of course, for the offensive. And that's why we want to have a COP, that's why we're all here. But we know that we then need to, as we just discussed, kind of get down to that level down. We're in the decade of delivery, so in our business sessions we need to do that, and in our policy work we need to do that. And that's where I think the concept of net positive, what, again, while we're all here, we believe that through a business government dialogue, you can kind of broken more change. We need to kind of grasp that going forward. So, and I think then we really, at the end of the conversation, talked about what we need. So we need to get smarter about what we want at that kind of delivery level. That's what you said that you need. You know, you need that expertise that is not going to exist inside your company. And that's where I think, you know, Sophie's talking about some of the things that we can do to get towards that. We also need to be smarter advocates. And that's definitely what Sophie was talking about in terms of the evidence base. We need to be able to go to governments, not just with, you know, we do present the business case as well as the moral case, but we also need to present that this can work in these ways. So that's what we're going to get better at in the next, I think, years to come. And then I think also what we need, and we have it, but we need to do more, is of course build these coalitions, you know, peer to peer, and we business and Ceres, B team, you know, everyone inside it. It's got good enablers of that. But we also need to still speak to those industry peers that are not with us. And actually that is a critical role for businesses that are interested in policy. It's not, I guess, just to spend their time talking to policymakers, but spend their time talking to their industry peers in order to kind of, to build that mainstream approach. Otherwise we're never going to get there. So I really did just enjoyed this discussion. Thanks for letting me lead it in different ways. But I think that was it was good with the people that we had. Well, thank you, Anne. See you soon.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
I'm looking forward to it. Because I know in a few years' time, you're going to go in every session. And this amendments, yeah. Change your house.